Most people know my grandpa as a quiet farmer. He's the kind of man who wakes up before dawn, tends to his cattle, and ends his day sitting on the porch with a cup of black coffee. But what people don't know is that years ago, Grandpa made a deal so sharp, it left an HOA seething with regret decades later. And when greed came knocking on his door, they discovered just how stubborn and unshakable one old farmer could be. Back in the 70s, the HOA didn't even exist yet. The land they would later build on was nothing more than rolling hills, thick timber, and a few worn-down barns. The previous landowners were strapped for cash, and no one saw the area as valuable. But Grandpa, he saw potential. When the chance came to buy 1,500 acres for just $2,000, he scraped together every dime he had, sold off a few tractors, and closed the deal. People laughed at him, saying he was crazy to waste money on worthless dirt. Grandpa just smiled and said, "They're not making more land, are they?" Fast forward 50 years, the town exploded in population. Highways cut through what used to be cattle trails, and the very hills that Grandpa bought for pennies became prime real estate, worth over $2 million. And sitting smack in the middle of it all was his 1,500 acres of legally owned, tax-paid land. That's when the HOA came crawling in. At first, they sent friendly letters dressed up with talk about community growth and neighborhood development. They offered him a laughable sum for the property, just a fraction of its value. Grandpa ripped up the letter and tossed it in the fireplace. But Karen, the HOA president, wasn't used to being told no. She marched up his driveway with a clipboard in one hand and entitlement in the other. "This land belongs to the HOA community," she snapped. "It was practically gifted to you. The fair thing would be to give it back, or we'll take it back." Grandpa just leaned on his cane, squinting at her through the afternoon sun. "Gifted," he said. "Lady, I paid for this land fair and square. I've kept the taxes paid longer than you've been alive. You want it? Then you'll have to fight me for it in court." That was the spark that set everything off. The HOA thought they could bully him into surrendering his land. They didn't realize they had picked a fight with a man who'd beaten droughts, market crashes, and the passage of time itself. And this time, he had more than stubbornness on his side. He had the law. The HOA wasn't about to walk away quietly. Karen, with her sharp tongue and sharper heels, strutted back into their boardroom with a mission. Take Grandpa's land, no matter the cost. She framed it as a community necessity, insisting that the HOA needed that acreage to expand their developments and increase property values. In reality, it was greed, pure and simple. They saw millions in potential revenue, and they couldn't stand the idea that a stubborn old farmer was the one standing in their way. At first, their tactics seemed almost laughable. Flyers began appearing in mailboxes around town, painting Grandpa as some kind of squatter who didn't contribute to the community. They called his barns unsafe eyesores and his fields wasted potential. But Grandpa had lived through worse than gossip. He'd survived crop failures, harsh winters, and even a tornado that once ripped the roof off his house. A few slanderous flyers weren't going to rattle him, but the HOA wasn't finished. Next came the fines. Yes, fines. Even though Grandpa's land wasn't part of their jurisdiction, Karen had her board send him official-looking documents, claiming he owed thousands of dollars for zoning violations and community upkeep fees. Grandpa laughed when he first read them, tossing the papers onto his kitchen table. "They can send me all the paper they want," he told me. "Doesn't mean it's worth the ink they wasted." When that didn't work, the intimidation began. HOA reps started parking their cars at the edge of his driveway, staring at him while he worked. They called county inspectors, trying to flag his barns as unsafe, even though they'd been standing for decades. One night, someone even cut his fence, letting his cattle wander into the road. Thankfully, Grandpa's neighbor spotted it before disaster struck. Karen herself showed up again, this time flanked by 2 HOA board members who looked more like enforcers than volunteers. She pointed at the land stretching out behind Grandpa's porch and said, "Do you realize what we could build here? Shopping centers, luxury homes, maybe even a golf course. You're standing in the way of progress." Grandpa's reply was as steady as his hand resting on that old cane. "This isn't progress, this is greed, and I don't sell out my family for anyone's golf course." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." The HOA doubled down. They filed bogus complaints with the county clerk claiming his deed was incomplete and the land should revert to community ownership. They tried to spin it in local news articles, making it sound like Grandpa had no rightful claim. But what they didn't know was that Grandpa kept every receipt, every tax record, every deed document neatly filed away since the day he bought the land. He had proof stacked higher than their lies. The HOA thought they could bury him under paperwork, fines, and intimidation. But all they did was awaken a fight in Grandpa they weren't prepared for. He wasn't just defending land. He was defending his legacy, his bloodline, and the very idea that honesty beats entitlement. And the first counterstrike was coming, sooner than they expected. Grandpa may have looked like just another old farmer with a cane, but beneath that weathered face was a man who had spent a lifetime learning how to stand his ground. The HOA thought they could bury him in bureaucracy, but they underestimated just how sharp Grandpa's memory and his filing cabinet really was. The first shot he fired wasn't with a gun, but with a stack of papers. He marched right into the county courthouse, leaning heavily on his cane, and laid out every single deed, tax receipt, and ownership record he had carefully kept since the 70s. The clerk raised her eyebrows as Grandpa's evidence piled higher and higher. It wasn't just enough to prove ownership. It was enough to show the HOA had been lying in their filings. Karen had officially overplayed her hand. Still, the HOA didn't back down. They tried to take the fight public, pushing local news outlets to run stories about the old man blocking community progress. But when reporters came to the farm to interview Grandpa, he didn't just tell his side. He showed them. He walked them through his fields, pointed to the barns he'd repaired with his own hands, and produced the original purchase contract. By the time the reporters left, the headline wasn't "Stubborn Farmer Blocks Growth." It was "HOA Overreaches in Land Grab Against Local Farmer." That alone should have been enough to shut them down. But Karen wasn't one to take humiliation lightly. A week later, Grandpa woke up to the sound of chainsaws. He stepped onto his porch to find HOA contractors cutting down trees along his property line, claiming they were clearing space for community expansion. Grandpa didn't waste a second. He picked up the phone, not to call the sheriff, but to call an old friend, the county attorney. Within the hour, a deputy was on site, shutting down the operation. The contractors were ordered to leave, and Karen was slapped with a warning for trespassing. That should have been the end of it. But instead, Karen grew bolder. The next HOA meeting turned into a circus, with her shouting about taking back what's rightfully ours and vowing to break the old man's hold on the land. What she didn't realize was that one of the attendees had recorded the entire rant, and it ended up online. Overnight, thousands of people watched her. Meltdown. Suddenly, it wasn't just Grandpa against the HOA. It was the town and the internet against Karen. But Grandpa wasn't finished. He knew the HOA would keep trying, so he prepared his next move, a lawsuit. Not just a defense case, but an offensive claim of harassment, trespassing, and attempted fraud. With his documentation, the attorney knew they had a rock-solid case. When Karen received the court summons, her smug confidence finally cracked. She had thought she was dealing with a frail old farmer too stubborn to move. Instead, she realized she was staring down a man who had just weaponized the very system she tried to use against him, and court wasn't going to be kind to her. Courthouse was packed the morning Grandpa's case finally came up. Farmers, neighbors, even people who had never met him but had seen the viral video of Karen's HOA rant showed up to see how it all played out. Karen strutted in with her board, members behind her trying to look composed, but the whispers that followed her were anything but supportive. Everyone knew why they were really there. It wasn't about community progress, it was about greed. Grandpa, on the other hand, walked in slow but steady, supported by his cane and carrying a single leather folder. That folder contained the history of his land, every receipt, deed, and tax bill since the day he purchased it. While Karen had her high-priced HOA attorneys, Grandpa had something stronger. The truth. The opening arguments set the tone. Karen's lawyer tried to spin a story that Grandpa's land had been misfiled in county records and should have reverted to the HOA for proper use. But when it was Grandpa's attorney's turn, he laid the paperwork on the judge's bench with a resounding thump. "Your Honor, my client has owned and maintained this land for over 4 decades. He paid for it, paid taxes on it, and defended it. What the HOA has done here isn't a clerical misunderstanding. It's targeted harassment." One by one, the evidence stacked up. Photos of Grandpa's signed purchase agreement from the 70s, county tax receipts from every single year since then, even the original flyer from the HOA's smear campaign, which now looked petty and cruel, in the sterile light of the courtroom. The judge's expression hardened with every page. Then came the testimony. Grandpa sat up straighter than I'd seen in years as he spoke. "This land isn't just dirt and grass, Your Honor. It's where I raised my family. It's where I taught my grandson how to drive a tractor. It's where I buried my wife under the oak tree she loved. And it's mine, fair and square. They sold it to me, and I've honored that deal every day since. They're not just trying to take my land, they're trying to erase my life's work." The courtroom was silent. Even Karen's own board members shifted uncomfortably. But the knockout blow came not from Grandpa, but from a witness the HOA hadn't expected, the county records clerk. She confirmed under oath that not only was Grandpa's deed valid, but the HOA's filings were fraudulent. Karen's attempt to claim the land wasn't just dishonest, it was illegal. Karen erupted, standing up and shouting, "This is ridiculous! That land was never meant for him. It's supposed to serve the community." The judge's gavel slammed down. "One more outburst like that and I'll hold you in contempt." By the time closing arguments were done, the case wasn't even close. The judge ruled in Grandpa's favor on every count. Not only did he affirm Grandpa's ownership, but he also ordered the HOA to pay damages for harassment, trespassing, and legal fees. For the first time, Karen didn't storm out. She slumped into her chair, pale and beaten. Grandpa leaned back, a small smile tugging at his lips. He hadn't just defended his land, he had turned the HOA's entire scheme into their public humiliation. And yet, he wasn't done. The final blow was still to come. When the gavel came, down the courtroom buzzed like a beehive. Some clapped, some whispered, but everyone knew one thing. Grandpa had just crushed the HOA in open court. Karen tried to keep her chin high, but the judgment was devastating. Not only did she lose the land grab, but now her HOA was on the hook for thousands in damages. Grandpa didn't say much as we left the courthouse. He just tipped his hat to. The judge thanked the clerk and shuffled out, cane tapping against the marble floor. But outside, when the cameras and reporters swarmed, he delivered a single line that would replay on the evening news across the state. "They thought they bought power with paper. I bought this land with my sweat, and sweat don't wash off." The clip went viral. By nightfall, Karen and her HOA weren't just embarrassed locally, they were infamous nationwide. Neighbors began petitioning to remove her from the HOA board entirely, and within weeks Karen was forced to step down. Meanwhile, Grandpa made his own moves. Instead of just holding onto the land, he partnered with a conservation trust. He legally bound the property so that no HOA, no developer, no greedy hand could ever touch it again. It would remain farmland, forest, and open water, forever. They wanted it for $2 million. Grandpa chuckled as he signed the papers. Now they can't have it for $200 million. The best part? The HOA, drowning in legal fees and community backlash, had to sell off its own amenities, the clubhouse, a golf cart fleet, even a piece of waterfront property just to pay the damages. Ironically, one of those foreclosed parcels sat right next to Grandpa's land. And yes, he bought it, cash. The day he signed that deed, Grandpa stood on the porch overlooking the very HOA that once tried to take him down. "Funny thing about land," he said with a grin. "You can't bully it away. You either earn it or you lose it." For Karen, it was the end of her reign of terror. For Grandpa, it was a victory that would be talked about long after he was gone. The man who bought 1/500 acres for $2,000 had proven something priceless. No HOA, no matter how powerful, could ever outmatch grit, truth, and a lifetime of standing firm. And that land, it still belongs to him, untouched, untouchable, just the way he always wanted. Karen thought she could steal funny 500 acres with lies. But Grandpa proved why you never mess with the truth. If you loved seeing justice served, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to HOA Karen Stories, and turn on the so you never miss when another greedy HOA gets what's coming. Tell me in the comments, if the HOA tried to take your land, how would you fight back? Because trust me, the next story is even wilder, and you don't want to miss it.